Welcome to Atheists Talk. I'm your host tonight, George Kane, and my guest is August Berkshire, the president of Minnesota Atheists. In part one of this series, we discussed many of the cases that relate to the Establishment Clause of the U.S. Constitution, the separation of church and state. Tonight, we're going to discuss specifically issues that relate to public education. The courts have found that children are an especially vulnerable audience to government messages of a very religious nature. So we're going to discuss specifically the court cases that relate to things that happen in the public schools. August, let's start with the Pledge of Allegiance. What can you tell us about court rulings in that matter?
Okay. Well, first I want to give some credit. These Supreme Court cases that we're going to be looking at, I got excellent reviews of them from a website called oyez.com, oyez.com. So I want to give them credit. Now, in the Pledge of Allegiance, the Supreme Court looked at this in 1943, a case called West Virginia State Board of Education versus Barnett. This was a case brought by Jehovah's Witnesses. Their religion forbids them from pledging to anything but God. Can't pledge to a flag, can't pledge to a country. They brought this case, and the Supreme Court said that compelling public school children to salute the flag was unconstitutional. Compulsory unification of opinion was antithetical to First Amendment values. And the very famous sentence that came out of this: if there's any fixed star in our constitutional constellation, it's that no official, high or petty, can prescribe what shall be orthodox in politics, nationalism, religion, or other matters of opinion, or force citizens to confess by word or act their faith therein. So the schools can offer the pledge, but a student is not required to participate in this. And this had ramifications in Minnesota a few years ago, right after 9/11, this patriotism that was sweeping the country. Minnesota instituted a mandatory Pledge of Allegiance for the students, but the students could opt out of it. And Minnesota Atheists was the only group, and you can imagine post 9/11, the only group to testify and said, you know, this shouldn't be mandatory. You shouldn't be imposing it on schools that they have to do this. And while we knew we weren't going to defeat the bill, we did get better protections for those who want to dissent. Because often if you don't participate in this group activity like pledging allegiance, you're viewed as an outsider, you're ostracized. And we got some protections in the law to say that, no, you're not unpatriotic simply because you might not want to participate in the pledge.
Right. I wonder how useful those protections really are. Thinking back many decades to when I was in school, we had no idea that you could opt out of saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I didn't find out about it until I got to high school. And we always thought, Pledge of Allegiance, of course you have to say the Pledge of Allegiance.
Yeah, now, at least in Minnesota, they're supposed to explicitly tell you, I think right in the school manual, the school book that you get at the beginning of the year. We haven't investigated to see if that's happening, but supposedly there are better protections for those who don't wish to participate. Now, this ruling came down in 1943, so that's before "under God" was added to the pledge. So you can just refuse to say it just on grounds that you don't want to be forced to salute a flag.
Right. Now, "under God" was added to the Pledge of Allegiance in what year?
1954, 55, right in there somewhere.
Yeah.
Now, the words "under God" have not reached the Supreme Court in the pledge. Michael Newdow, who we discussed in the last show, has been challenging this, saying that while schools are offering the pledge, they can't offer, his claim is that they can't offer a pledge that has "under God" in it, because that turns it into a prayer, and that's an impermissible promotion of religion.
I believe, though, that it did reach the Supreme Court, but the Supreme Court refused to decide it and dismissed it on the basis of standing.
Right. I mean, it reached it, but they kicked it back on saying that he didn't have proper standing, custody of his daughter. He was in a divorced case. Yeah.
All right. Well, what about religious instruction in the schools?
Well, this was a case brought in 1948 McCollum versus Board of Education, District 71. And a group of religious people in the community formed a Champaign, Illinois Council on Religious Education and went into the public schools to offer religious instruction on the public school grounds. Students could opt out of it if they wanted to. And the Supreme Court said, no, you can't do that, that the use of tax-supported property for religious instruction and the close cooperation between school authorities and the religious council violated the First Amendment, saying it's beyond question that a utilization of tax-established and tax-supported public schools to aid religious groups and to spread the faith is not constitutional.
There's a closely related question of release time.
Right. Now, and this is a case where instead of religion being brought into the school, the students are released from school hours to attend religious classes off school grounds. And the Supreme Court said that that's okay because the release time program does not constitute an establishment of religion, and it doesn't interfere with the free exercise of religion, that public facilities were not being used to promote the religious instruction, and that no student was forced to go to these religious classes off campus.
I really hope that issues like this are looked at again by the courts. We had a case here in Minnesota in which it seems that the students who opt out really are disadvantaged with respect to the students who go. That when they stay behind, they had to attend study hall. Their normal classes were not held, and that all the classes that were held during the rest of the day were shortened by 10 minutes.
Yeah, I think in this case, the normal classes went on, and the students that left for the religious studies elsewhere missed some classes. But you're right, there are cases with the charter school now you're thinking of in Minnesota, where they have the religious instruction and things grind to a halt in the school, and that certainly seems to me to be unconstitutional.
Right. What about prayer and Bible readings in school? Are they ever legal?
Yeah.
Well, that's a pretty famous case.
Yeah, 3 cases came down between 1962 and 1963. In 1962, there's a case called Engel versus Vitali, and this was the Board of Regents in the state of New York composed a prayer. If you can imagine the state composing a prayer, and it was supposed to be a short voluntary prayer for recitation at the start of each school day, and this was the prayer: Almighty God, we acknowledge our dependence upon Thee and beg Thy blessings upon us, our teachers, and our country. Kind of a generic little thing. And the Supreme Court said, no. Even though it's non-denominational and it's voluntary, this is unconstitutional. The state's providing the prayer, and it's officially approved religion by the state. So, that's no good. Then the next year, 1963, we had a couple cases come down. Abington School District versus Schempp, and the famous Murray versus Curlett case. And this involved Bible readings and a recitation of the Lord's Prayer at the beginning of the school day. And again, the Supreme Court said, no, can't do that. These readings and recitations were essentially religious ceremonies and were intended by the state to be such. The ability of the parent to excuse the child from the ceremonies was irrelevant because it didn't prevent the school's actions from being religious ceremonies. Just because some people choose not to participate in these religious ceremonies doesn't make it okay. They're still religious ceremonies, prayers and Bible readings. Now we're talking about devotional prayers and Bible readings. You can take a comparative religion class where you look at a religious text and say, oh, this is the story of creation as found in this religious text, and here's another story of creation as found in another religious text. And there you're studying about religion. It's not devotional. You're not, the school's not trying to make you believe in it the way it was in these cases.
I know there's a common misconception that a lot of people hold that everywhere in the United States before this decision that prayer was said in public schools that Madalyn Murray O'Hair became the most hated woman in America because she took prayer from public schools, and this is something that especially fundamentalist Christians want to reinstitute. I know that it's simply not the case that there were prayers everywhere. My parents attended public school in California long before me, and they never, I've talked to them about it, and they never had prayer in public school there. So
yeah, it was not universal.
It was not
by
universal.
Any means.
Yeah.
Right. And it wasn't just the atheist Madalyn Murray O'Hair's case that got it out. There were 3 cases that came down in 62, 63.
Of which I think the Shemp case is the most important. But we'll go on. What about posting 10 Commandments in the schools?
Well, this is a case where in the public sphere, we discussed in the last show that sometimes 10 Commandments seem to be okay, sometimes they're not. But as you mentioned at the top of the show, when it's in a school setting, school children are viewed as more vulnerable, more scrutiny is placed on this. And in 1980, a case called Stone versus Graham, there was a Kentucky law requiring the posting of 10 Commandments in every public school classroom. And the court said that the Kentucky law violated the Establishment Clause of the Lemon Test that we talked about in the last show, that posting the 10 Commandments had no secular purpose, and that the 10 Commandments are plainly religious in nature, that the 10 Commandments don't confine themselves just to secular matters like stealing and murder, but there are commandments dealing with how to worship God and the observance of the Sabbath day. So this is, the religious nature of the 10 Commandments was really clear. But it was only a 5-2 case, so that was good. Let's hope it stands up if it gets challenged again.
Now, in response to the courts prohibiting prayer in schools, there have been some states that have tried to substitute a moment of silence. What's been the response to that?
Right, exactly. In 1985, a case called Wallace versus Jaffree, to get around an outright saying of a prayer, there's an Alabama law that authorized teachers to conduct a 1-minute period of silent meditation or voluntary prayer. So they thought they would get around the Constitution this way. And again, the Supreme Court said, no, that this moment of silence, they applied the secular purpose test and said it has no secular purpose. You're just doing this to promote prayer. So no, can't do that. That you're trying to establish religion in public schools. You can't do that.
Right. And once again, this is similar to a case we mentioned in the previous program. The courts look at the text of speeches given in the hearings and statements made to the press by the legislators in order to determine the purpose. And so in order to sneak under the watch of the First Amendment, they would have to not mention a religious purpose at all in getting the law passed.
Yeah, and there really is no secular purpose to having a moment of silence.
Right.
So.
All right. What about clergy-led prayers at graduation ceremonies?
Yes. This question comes up a lot. Can you have prayers at a graduation ceremony at a junior high or high school? Well, in 1992, in a case called Lee versus Weisman, the Supreme Court addressed a case where they actually brought in someone from the clergy to deliver the prayer. This was a Providence, Rhode Island, a middle school principal invited a rabbi to come in and give an invocation at the graduation ceremony. And the Supreme Court ruled that this is clearly unconstitutional. It's the government involvement in the case creates a state-sponsored, state-directed religious exercise in the public schools, forcing students to act in ways that establish the state religion. They have to be quiet and solemn and listen to this prayer. So that was clearly an establishment in their minds. Now, the question then comes up, well, what about if the students do the prayer? Very often at graduation, the valedictorian will give a talk. And this just was in the news just a couple of days ago in Montana. There was a valedictorian student who wanted, and the speeches were pre-screened by the school to see what they were going to say. She wanted to give praise to Jesus and to God for her success. And a judge in Montana said, no, you can't do that. This case will probably be challenged higher up. I don't think the Supreme Court has ever ruled on the validity of whether a student can invoke God. And there's two ways you can invoke God. The woman in this Montana case, she said, well, I wasn't telling people they should believe in Jesus. I was just crediting him for my success. So she made a distinction there. But the judge said, no, you can't even do that. So I don't think the Supreme Court's ruled on this.
I think there's an issue in this case that the schools have a right to review the material that the valedictorian is going to read, is going to present. That they can prohibit certain expression on many bases, other than just religion, if it would give widespread offense. And so the argument would be that it's not a free speech forum that the school is offering the student.
And this leads us into our next case that we're going to talk about.
Okay. What about prayers at school football games?
Well, the Supreme Court addressed this in the year 2000 in Santa Fe Independent School District versus Doe. At first, the school had a thing where they had a prayer before home football games over the loudspeakers, and the prayer was overtly Christian. That got challenged. In the process of it being challenged or working its way up the court system, they changed it so that the invocations would be non-sectarian and not proselytizing. They still could appeal to God, but they're not trying to convert you to Christianity. They could be more generic, and the students themselves would vote to decide if they wanted these prayers, and then the students themselves would vote to decide who would deliver the prayer. So they tried to make it student-initiated, non-sectarian, watered it down pretty much as they could. But Supreme Court said, no, still it's not good enough that the district's policy permitting this prayer, even though it's student-led, student-initiated, it still violates the First Amendment because football game prayers were public speech authorized by a government policy taking place on government property at a government-sponsored school-related event. So the district's policy involved both perceived and actual government endorsement, the delivery of prayer at an important school event. So you would think if the Supreme Court's not going to allow the most generic of student-initiated prayers at a football game, that it would be okay to prohibit these prayers, even though if they're student-led, at a graduation ceremony. To be consistent.
I've got a couple of comments. One, there was an article that was published a couple of years ago in the Freedom from Religion Foundation newsletter, Church and State, I think is the name of it.
Free Thought Today.
Free Thought Today, thank you. And this was it was an article written by a Christian who came to oppose prayers at high school athletic games because they moved to Hawaii. And they went to an athletic event, and clear violation of the cases in which you're citing. But there was a prayer that was held before this game to a volcano god, to which the Christian objected. Okay. And even though these issues have been decided, that doesn't mean that sometimes there are not violations, and that it's important for people listening, people who have children in school, to object and to raise the issues when they occur.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on. What about permitting after-school religious clubs to meet on school classrooms?
Yeah. Well, this was a case that was decided in 1990. Board of Education of Westside Community Schools versus Mergens. This is a case where Westside High School had a policy that denied permission to a group of students who wanted to form an after-school Christian club that had the same privileges and meeting terms as other school clubs. And the school said, no, it's a religious club, we can't allow that. And the students said, well, but you're censoring us, you're allowing these other clubs Anyway, went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, well, schools have two kinds of clubs. One is called a curriculum-based club, like the French club, where it's reinforced by classes that are taking part during the day, and it's connected. You might get extra credit for going to the French club. There's a tie between the curriculum club and the school. And there's non-curriculum clubs that have nothing to do with what goes on in the classes. A chess club might be one of these things. And so if the school is going to allow non-curriculum student clubs, it can't censor them. It says that you cannot deny equal access to any after-school club based on the content of its speech. So the Supreme Court said you have to allow Christian student clubs after school. Now, of course, this was pushed by right-wing Christians, and in a wonderful turn of irony, this law was then used by gay-straight alliances who are opposed by the religious right to get their clubs in, and the schools have had to abide by that law. So, if you're going to protect speech, it's going to protect all speech and all points of view. So you have to apply the law equally.
Now, when I was in school, I don't know if this still applies, but all of these after-school clubs had to have a faculty sponsor. So it would be required, if you're going to have a religious club, that there be a faculty advisor who's willing to sponsor the club, I presume?
Yeah, I don't know if this ruling addressed that or not. I know my general understanding of the law is that this club has to be student-initiated. You can't bring in a priest from outside to establish the club. The students have to say, we want that. And you might be able to have a teacher who's an advisor who kind of looks over it, but doesn't run it. The teacher can't be running the religious club, but he or she can oversee it.
This leads to one of those gray areas, I think, about whether there is whether teachers have free speech rights in the classroom, that they can express their own religious standpoint, or if they are exclusively during their time in the classroom the representative of government as public school employees.
Right. There's a case in the news just recently in California where you had a math teacher in a school, and he had all these banners up in his classroom saying things like, in God we trust, one nation under God, God bless America, God shed his grace on thee, all men are created equal, they are endowed by their Creator. This is a math class, so it has nothing, the banners have nothing to do with it. But he says it was free speech, he should be allowed to put up what he wants in his classroom. And the federal judge, so this is not a Supreme Court case, this is just a lower judge, said that's perfectly fine because the school is allowing other teachers to put up their views, including atheistic views and all kinds of political views. So if you're going to allow that, and in fact they had, some teacher had up a poster for John Lennon, imagine there's no heaven, it's easy if you try, no hell below us, above us only sky, the atheist anthem.
Right.
So if you're going to allow teachers to put this up, then you can't censor them on religion. So that's the federal judge in that case said, no, it's fine for him to have these pro-God statements.
Right. That's a cultural change from when I was in school. I remember when I was in high school, if a teacher was an activist in some political issue or religion, you never knew about it. They never brought it into the classrooms.
Same with me too.
All right. What about paying a subsidy for public transportation to parents with children in religious schools?
Yeah, in 1947, a case called Everson versus Board of Education, a New Jersey law allowed money to go to parents to reimburse the parents to send their children to school, whether it's public school or private school, and if the private school was religious. And the court said this was okay for a couple of reasons. First of all, busing is a neutral service. And this was buses that were already running, public transportation that was already running, not set up specifically for the religious school. So busing is a neutral service. The money is being given to the parent, and that becomes important in a lot of these cases, that the money is given to the parent, not the school. So that this is just a general program to assist all parents of all religion or no religion. And so it's a neutral program, and so it was okay to reimburse the parents.
Okay. What about a related matter of lending textbooks to religious school students?
Yeah, this was a case, 1968, Board of Education versus Allen, where there was a law in New York that required public schools, which would have had secular textbooks because they're public schools, to allow them to lend the schools to children who were going to private schools, even if it was a religious private school. So if you had a public school math textbook, you could give it to the child, and the child could bring it to the religious school. And this was viewed as constitutional because it didn't advance any one religion or religion in general, that the books were given to the students, not to the school. And the financial benefit is to the parents and children, not to the schools.
Okay. We have a lot of cases yet that we could cover, but we're coming very closely to the end of our program.
Okay.
And I didn't want to finish up without mentioning at all creationism in science classrooms.
Right. The Supreme Court addressed this in 1987, Edwards versus Aguillard. This is a Louisiana law. It was called the Balanced Treatment for Creation Science and Evolution Science in Public School Instruction Act. And it said that whenever you taught evolution, you also had to teach creation. You could not teach either one if you didn't want to, but if you taught one, whether it was evolution or creation, you had to teach the other. And the Supreme Court said, no, it fails all three of the Lemon tests. There's no secular purpose to this. The primary effect is to advance a religious viewpoint, and it causes a significant entanglement between church and state. Now, recently there's been a case on intelligent design that did not go to the Supreme Court. A lot of us have heard about in 2005, Kitzmüller versus Dover Area School District. And this is Dover, Pennsylvania. And the judge there said intelligent design is also a religious idea that could not be taught. And that applies to the district, but it was so well judged, I think, that no one else has tried to challenge this teaching of intelligent design.
Right. And intelligent design was a supposed scientific theory that was specifically tailored to try to meet court objections to the teaching of creationism.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, August. We're reaching the end of our time. I want to invite members of our audience who enjoyed our program to contact us at the numbers that they've seen on the bottom of the screens during the program. And if you write to us, we will send you one issue of our newsletter. And this is getting to be quite a nice little monthly benefit of membership. A lot of interesting articles in it. And please keep watching this program, because if you're interested in us, we're interested in you.